Hello, everyone. Welcome to this newest episode of NDNABA with Martin and Daniel. I'm your host, Martin. Alongside of me is my co-host, Daniel. Daniel, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here again, Martin. It's actually my 28th birthday today. There's nowhere
Awesome,
I'd
man.
rather be than with you and our esteemed guest we have lined up, Brian Middleton, the bearded behaviorist.
Hello,
So
everybody.
here he is.
Welcome.
And yeah, we have Brian here. We're very excited. We do want to let you guys know that in case you skipped last week, where we talked about some sensitive subjects, that we will be picking up where we left off around the issue concerning scrolling into trouble, its retraction by the EJBA, though the ramifications still existing through people like Oswin Latimer being removed from their invitation for mass ABA and so forth. For people who didn't watch last episode, our hearts go out to the families affected by the tragedy. And if you are located in San Bernardino or around that area, I'm sure you already know what we're referring to. So please do your best to take your own mental health into account and make sure that you're reaching out to support and resources if needed at this time. We're there for you as well. DM us. We'd love to chat anytime. Yeah, our hearts sincerely go out to the community of San Bernardino. We'll leave it at that for now. Brian,
Yeah.
so great to have you here. I wonder if you might like to just introduce yourself before we get talking about Neurodiversity Celebration Week. That was March 18th through March 22nd.
Sure, I'm glad to introduce myself. Um, my name is Brian Middleton. I am a human. I'm a human who is curious. I'm a human who experiences autism, what we call ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and I'm partially deaf. So I've experienced quite a few unique experiences. At the same time, I'm also a human, and I like to put emphasis on that because I feel like if we center around that and then help to understand that the human experience is very broad and there's a lot of things that we can experience from, we can learn from each other, and a lot of perspective taking we can take or do. And then what that does is it allows for us to be able to expand our experiences and build community. Um, I'm also known as the bearded behaviorist. Um, for those who are not familiar with me. And I am a board certified behavior analyst, licensed behavior analyst, um, as well as being a veteran teacher. I was a special ed teacher. I also taught social sciences, so history, psychology, political science, economics, geography. It, it was tons of fun to teach those. I didn't get as much experience with that as I'd like, but at the same time, I got tons of experience as a special ed teacher because I got to teach all those topics and then co-teach math, science, and a bunch of other classes as well. So I just love learning. I love being curious. Behavior analysis feels like home to me in many respects because applied behavior analysis is the application of the science of learning to help better the world around us. And I came into behavior analysis because I was working with my students, and we were having some amazing impacts on their lives, me and my staff that were working with these students. And the secret that we had was we just treat the kids like people. Um, Shocker, that changes everything. But we kept on coming across barriers that we didn't know how to get past. And it was really difficult to identify and get past those issues. And so I explored and looked for answers and found some answers in behavior analysis. And since then, I've shifted away from being a full-time teacher to being a full-time behavior analyst. And I love it. And I'm really excited because I get to teach and explore at the same time. And that's something I think that we should celebrate. You mentioned, Daniel, World Behavior Analysis Day. I usually tend to be a little bit quieter on World Behavior Analysis Day, not because I don't think it's worth celebrating, but because I feel like celebrating when there are some very real issues that we're still dealing with, like contingent electric skin shock, still being acceptable in our field. Approaches that are coercive are still acceptable in our field. The fact that the Riker and Lovaas article is still published and has not been withdrawn, which, for those who aren't aware, that the Feminine Boy project is the foundation of conversion therapy. So I tend to have a hard time feeling like I want to celebrate when those things are still acceptable, or at least quietly ignored in the background. Which isn't to say that there isn't a reason to celebrate. There's lots of reasons to celebrate. And yet at the same time, I have a hard time getting into the celebration because of those things. And so I think, again, it's worth celebrating, and it's also worth making it known that there are still, to this day in 2024, people who are subject to electrical shock that is 6 to 16 times more powerful than a stun gun.
Oh my, you know what?
And
I'm glad you brought up
that,
Stop the Shock really quick for our audience. I know that issue is very close to you as well, Martin.
Yeah.
The first things I think when we met up and became buddies, at first we started talking about and thinking about how we wanted to start our advocacy, and things like this, raising the voices of those affected by certain treatments and people in neurodivergent populations represented by services that are meant to help them. In a lot of cases, we are there to raise those voices up and make sure those opinions are valued. And again, I'm so glad you're here, Brian. And, even as I drink out of my behavior analysis cup, I am fully, feeling that there's a need to make sure that I clarify to everyone that there's much need for change in the world of ABA.
Yep.
Brought up the World Behaviour Analysis Day. Actually, I think I even was kind of forgetting to mention it over Neurodiversity Celebration Week, just for that purpose I mentioned before. We want to, on this podcast, as much as possible, to raise up neurodivergent people and voices of the neurodiverse community, so that the powers that be will be able to see these valid lived experiences as data they should be taking into account. We also want to make a space for people to promote their good work in the field and efforts to evolve, do better, and commit themselves to activism like Martin's. Last week, we talked about police and first responder programs for educating about autism awareness and inclusion. And, beyond that, there's a lot that we can do better as behavior analysts, as well as people in a society. So again, that maybe extends to your experience in the school. I'm really glad you brought that piece in. For me, I became really passionate about behavior analysis as well, because I came out of, the school system, went into my psychology degree, and I didn't really know, what to do or what worked, though I had this passion for helping kids as a baseball coach at first, and then an umpire. And then I realized that the most affected kids, in summer camp or baseball, whatever, they were having difficulty with maybe a lot of these similar issues we see in the neurodivergent community. Of course, I've never violated somebody's privacy by asking about their diagnosis on the baseball field, though I could tell the most pride I ever felt was helping those kids who maybe they're throwing their helmet at the wall, or the bat, and they're screaming in the dugout, when there's something going on, or they can't, hold still, or, follow the rules, and, though they're still in the activity, they're struggling to go along. I broadened that out and, realized that there's a lot of room for growth in our society to accept people, validate their emotions, and adjust accommodatingly to see where we can best support our own relationship with them, as well as their health and growth in the environment we give them. So, if you build it, they will come, to quote Field of Dreams. And here you are, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us. You're maybe one of the first handful of arrivals to this Field of Dreams that we're building in ABA, but I welcome you to it, and anyone else who is going the extra miles to learn about Dr. Hanley or learn about new methods that they can use, new AAC information that's valuable to our nonverbal learners, or, ways that assent can be used to advocate, to raise somebody's voice where they may not have one. Good on you guys. You're doing your best, and that's what Neurodiversity Celebration Week is all about. And
Yep.
by the powers that be, that's what World Behaviour Analysis Day should be all about. March 20th was all about raising awareness for those we serve, I hope. And it's great to have a holiday. We like having a holiday, BCBAs. Let's be honest, it feels good, even for our staff members who work in the field of ABA. All together, we all are behavior analysts, as Brian often says in his material. RBTs, you're behavior analysts too. You're learning these methods and you're applying them. And of course, there's this sort of a learning process and credentialing hierarchy that you can go up, but that doesn't mean you haven't started as a clinician with the Hippocratic Oath, who is a behavior analyst. Okay, and if you have a good heart to do this, then that's really all you need. And really, welcome to the field of dreams that we're building. Martin, you're here too. We love having you here. And I also forgot to mention, before I go too far, about Down syndrome, World Down Syndrome Day occurring March 21st as well. We do want to bring this up because a lot of our clients and patients and those we care to serve have comorbid diagnoses. They exist in this world and they struggle with feeling, marginalized, like we talked about last week with that TikTok of the girl with Down syndrome, where the assumptions become reality, right? And many of these individuals, they have autism as well. And a lot of cases, there's low support needs, but there's also profound autism. The reason we bring this up, the Profound Autism Summit is only 2 weeks away. So, I think that's all the news I feel like I wanted to make sure gets out there before we dive too deep. Though, Brian, can you please let our audience know what are the terms that we should be using nowadays to align ourselves in ABA and also in the sort of pop psychology and social environments regarding neurodiversity? And when I say align, I mean, I really want us to kind of approach this neuro-affirming sphere of values that I think is really imperative to building the new field that we all want to take part in.
Yes. So let's start with understanding the term neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is akin to the term biodiversity. So biodiversity refers to a biome that has a diverse concentration of living organisms. So if we were to talk about a typical forest meadow, perhaps like a hardwood forest meadow, we'll have rodents, we'll have lizards, we'll have amphibians, we'll have avians, we might have a whole variety of mammals, some that are predatory, some that are more herbivore prey animals, a concentration in between. But we won't just have animals, we'll also have plants. So we'll have maybe ferns and grasses and bushes and trees and a whole variety there. And that holistic view is called biodiverse, meaning that there's a diversity of biological organisms that are present within that. So for comparison purposes, now we look at neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is the idea that there's a diversity of neurobiological types within humanity. So understanding that is critical, because if we don't understand that little piece right there, then everything else becomes muddled up. I am not neurodiverse, just like a fern by itself is not neurodiverse. You are not neurodiverse because you are an individual within a structure. So neurodiversity refers to the whole, and using that term in that way is critical, of being like neurodiversity is all neurotypes. Next, we use the term neurotypical. Personally, I don't like the fact that neurotypical was the word that was used. I would have preferred the neurological mean, or neurobiological mean would probably have been more appropriate. However, even that is a little bit misleading as a term, because neurotypical refers to what is typically accepted within a society. That critical piece there is accepted, or rather, another way of putting it is accepted as typical. So when somebody is referred to as being neurotypical, that doesn't mean that they're not, they're not, sorry, it does not mean that they're all one neurotype. There could be people, what is classified as neurotypical could be a variety of neurotypes that fall within a structure, because people are diverse and there's a diversity of experiences. And so it's simply referencing what is typically accepted. And then that brings in the term neurodivergent, divergent meaning diverging from the typically accepted norm. And once
enlightening that you bring that out. I know sometimes even myself, I may say the wrong thing. I say I want to support neurodiverse individuals, which I'll correct myself now for everybody for future. What I mean to say is I want to support neurodivergent individuals with my outreach in this podcast and the work I do with Da Vinci NCR Services, LLC, and really supporting somebody with an individual neuro profile, can be different, is going to be different than supporting any other given person. But it's great to find resources that people can choose to access and to allocate towards themselves of their own free will.
Well, and as we're moving into understanding neurodiversity, it would be appropriate to say, I want to support a neurodiverse environment, because we don't, I've created a couple posts on this, and I like to bring this issue up because I'm, my first special interest, my first love was history. And in history, we see pendulum swings where we see where things are going back and forth. And when this pendulum swings in too far in one direction or another, certain groups get left behind or get hurt. And my hope is that maybe we don't, I don't know that there's a way to end the pendulum swing of history, but I do want to make it so that the swings are less extreme at the bare minimum. And so I always like to make a point that whilst a good portion of neurodivergent individuals are experiencing isolation, the goal of the neurodiversity movement, which is aligned with the functional contextualist approach to things, is to try to create harmony within our environment to help address the problems that we face. And so I think it's very appropriate to say, let's focus on neurodiversity. Let's make it a place where all neurotypes are able to thrive and live together. And in fact, that brings up a really critical piece that it needs to be included alongside neurodiversity, which is understanding disability. And what is disability? The pathology paradigm is the paradigm that the dominant paradigm that we operate in, the paradigm that we pathologize behavior, that a behavior I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Pathology is not bad. Pathology is, right? The pathology paradigm has a place, and that place is addressing things like cancer and infectious diseases. And yet the problem with the pathology paradigm is that pathology is about isolate, correct. And when you're talking about and describing a diversity of human experiences and realizing that the human experience isn't that bell curve with the middle of the bell curve, so 1 to 2 standard deviations from the center, it's the entire bell curve. That's all the human experience. Then we have a problem, because then we're isolating anybody outside those standard deviations. In the case of people who are genius level, they're isolated in one way. People who are considered intellectually disabled, or if just looking at that from IQ perspective, but also from other human experiences, it creates isolation. And the pathology paradigm perceives disability as something that exists within the human, within the person. To utilize some of Skinner's early references and work, it's a homunculi. Disability is a homunculi or an explanatory fiction that is used to justify in circular logic form why we're treating people the way that we're treating them. However, enter in the social model for disability. So the first model I referenced was the medical model of disability. Social model of disability and human rights model of disability are two really important models. One is looking at disability from a social perspective. One is looking at disability from a human rights perspective. They sync very beautifully. But then I recently learned about the biopsychosocial model for disability, and I actually have a preference towards the biopsychosocial model, not because the social and human rights model are wrong, but because it adds nuance. It allows for us to be able to incorporate in those areas where pathology is necessary, but also maintaining the social and human rights aspects. And from all three of those models' perspective, disability doesn't exist within the person. Disability exists between the interaction of the person and the environment. So where environment and individual interact determines whether somebody is disabled or not. So I'll use this as a model or example. Here I'm holding a lovely bottle of cream soda.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very delicious. Okay. This is our individual. So if I take this bottle and I set it down on my my desktop, the interaction between the bottle and the environment of the desktop is one that does not disable the bottle. However, if I were to take this bottle and I were to try to place it upon my keyboard, there's a possibility that this bottle will fall over. And in fact, it's sliding, it falls over.
I see what you mean there. And there's a common cartoon that just immediately pops into my head. Maybe many of you guys have seen it, where there's the quote about, if you, everybody is a genius, but if you expect a fish to, climb a tree, it's going to fail. So, there's several animals lined up and they're in a classroom is the idea. And not everybody is the person who's going to necessarily, fit in ideally to that land-based classroom, right? Especially if they're more akin to a fish, but they have skills like swimming. They've got valuable skills that the other animals can't do. And they're certainly, holding value in our society if we're expanding this metaphor of animals, different animals not fitting into different habitats and expanding that to a classroom where now we're humans with different neurotypes, and some classrooms don't fit certain neurotypes. Something I like to bring up at this time is there's a difference between we have a neurotypical person, and then we have somebody who is neurodivergent, but neurotypical is actually its own neurotype. So then there's actually something that we call neurodiversity theory, which has been something expanding in the field lately. One of my colleagues or my pen pals in the UK, I guess I like to call them, Jessica Dark ND, has a lovely paper published in February. It really summarizes there is a difference between what we call a neuro profile and a neuro trait, right? And there are certain things that we all have neuro traits, and these combinations make up our neuro profile. And this is something that determines our neurotype. Basically, are we falling under certain categories? Something like hyperlexia, for instance, though, is that a disability, so to speak, or is it an advantage in a lot of cases to be highly literate, reading, exceptionally well, speaking, and very good with languages? That certainly has a value and is a neuro trait, though it's not neurotypical. So there's all these different things that are coming out these days, and a lot of groundbreaking research that I want you guys to check out. Martin, I know that you're really excited to talk about this. I wanted to kind of touch base on Autism Inclusion and Acceptance Week again. Last week we talked about it. If you guys remember, Martin's proclamation came out in Santa Clara, and it's going to be promoting this idea of April coming into the increased atmosphere of autism inclusion that we'd like to see, especially given the events of this year already.
Yeah. So before I do that, I do have a pretty solid question for our guest today, Brian. It's a two-part question. So the first part is, when you first started out as a behavior analyst, how was that like? And to transition to the second question, for autistics who want to become a behavior analyst, what are some pointers you can give them?
My start as a behavior analyst was a little bit interesting because I started as a special ed teacher who learned behavior analysis. And
Okay.
so my exposure to behavior analysis was quite a bit different. It was very much more aligned with kind of the and this is funny because when I first learned about Hanley and Hanley's work, I was just like, well, this is no duh.
Yeah, right,
For
right.
me. And so for me, my initial exposure was like, oh, hey, this is cool principles that I can apply to my classroom to make things in my classroom better. And so my initial response was like, well, this stuff just makes sense. And then later I came across the Lavoisian-esque, and I know the different variations. Some people are like, well, no, that's verbal behavior approach, and no, this. And I'm like, it's the
Right.
pathology and paradigm informed approach. I have those words now thanks to my studying
Okay.
to understand. So so it was later that I realized with horror the frequency that these things were acceptable, the coercion-based approaches. But my initial exposure and preference towards behavior analysis was one of a lot of gratitude, because it made a big difference in my classroom. And it actually helped me to shift away from the pathology paradigm because I was in a practical application state.
Right.
My advice for autistics and any other neurodivergent individual who's interested in becoming a behavior analyst is to seek out people who are aligned with this view, and
Right. Right.
to avoid or look for ways of moving away from people who are not aligned with the neurodiversity or functional contextualist approach. Does that mean like 100% like never go through and like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of how I have to phrase this. Does that mean don't get into behavior analysis just because you can't maybe find somebody locally who can help you? No, not necessarily, because we need your voices in this field. I will warn you that, and I regularly have people reach out to me who are like, I recently got my autism diagnosis as an adult, and I'm wondering if I should come out and tell people. And my response is, it's up to you and your values.
Right.
It's up to you on what matters to you. And I have some friends and some very close acquaintances who have opted to not tell, and they feel bad about that. And my response is, don't feel bad about that, because there's a lot of struggle that comes with being open about this. The reality is that we're living in a world that disables us.
Right.
We're living in a world that pathologizes us, and we're living in a world where we have to deal with those particular issues. And so my advice is, choose your battles and take care of your own health. And if choosing your battles and taking care of your own health means don't be here, then that's fine. I'm not going to hold you to any standard that I hold myself to, because we're different. You may have heard the saying, if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic.
Oh yeah.
And I just like to point out that is a really weird way of saying everybody's different.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
strange way of saying it, definitely. And maybe it's not the most neuro-inclusive way, because I'd say I go beyond that and even say, if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person.
Right.
You know,
And I
not
go so far as to say, if you met one human, you've met one human.
that's
Right.
probably it, right? And we could go even further, but I don't even know if we have time to go down the phylogenetic tree, but we could, I'm sure, in a lot of ways. But really, we want to talk about, what's the way to make our world more inclusive on this podcast. And that's what we're really getting at here, right? We want to be inclusive to everyone, not just one type of person, right?
Right.
I know that you probably are are just getting out into the beginnings of this now, Martin. It's probably coming up, rapidly approaching. Would you care to tell us what are some of the things that we could look out for next month?
Definitely. I have about 4 minutes left before I have to get going to a pretty big meeting. But next month with April being Autism Acceptance Month, I'm going to be releasing a blog talking about why we should switch from awareness to acceptance. Because at this point, awareness is not enough. I mean, when we did the stats last week, here in the United States, the rate is 1 in 36. In California, it's 1 in 22. But here, they did a cluster of research in different counties in California. And so for here in Santa Clara County, where I am, that stat is 1 in every 3 kids.
And I do believe there's a lot of parents with multiple children with autism,
right,
perhaps contributing to the statistic. And there's a very prominent doctor out in Santa Clara. We'll put the link down there as well, where we can share more about this, because I gave it a read myself and I was surprised. The science behind that, though, for those who don't know, if you have one child who happens to have autism, there are increasing odds that the next child will also have autism as well. The statistic they had was after, if you have 2 children who ended up developing and being diagnosed with autism, then it is about 1 in 3 likelihood that you will potentially have a third child, if you have a third child, that they will
right,
have autism as well.
right.
And I hesitate to say have autism. I know that let's start there, maybe adjusting our language for inclusivity. You want to say you have an autistic child. The reason there is have people with autism, we're trying to be PC. I know we're trying to say it, but autism is not an accessory. And sometimes when you use it that way, rather than giving someone the support that they need. And maybe this is possibly why many feel that the diagnosis doesn't serve them, right? Rather than giving them support, this accessory may be the attribute that is attached to their reference, which defers them to be invalidated or talked over and potentially lose out on some of the rights they may have otherwise. So these are things. Oh, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
I was just going to point out that the have autism and the person with the person first language, it's well intended, and I don't if the person is not receptive, I don't correct, because I'm not interested in isolating people. I'm interested in including and bringing them in. But when opportunity allows, I like to bring up that autism, a person with autism is like that homunculi, that medical model piece. You're not a person with artistry. You're an artist. You're not a person with athleticism. You're an athlete. You're not a person with parentism. You're a parent. It's a part of who the person is. And some people go, oh, identity politics. And I'm like, well, is it a part of who you are? Are you a person with mechanicism, or are you a mechanic?
Right.
That's an interesting way to put it. But that way definitely boldens the contradiction there. Given that mechanicism, I don't think anyone ever uses that word, actually. Right. But you know what? We would if it were that way, but identities are not assigned in that manner. Once you have an attribute that then you're not a person with with that attribute. You are a attributely person, right? Exactly. I know we don't have a lot of time. So Martin, was there still some other things in April we can look out for? I know it's a really exciting month with your proclamation going through in Santa Clara.
Yep. Definitely. Be on the lookout for a new blog on my website, spireautism.com, where I talk about why we should be more towards acceptance than awareness. And for those who didn't watch last week's episode, I put we should switch from awareness to acceptance, because when you think about it, awareness means that you are aware, but just like that's just that, you're aware. But if we switch to acceptance and focus more on that, not only are you aware, but also help us, make us feel more welcomed in society, if that makes sense. And or almost like help us not feel like we don't belong, if that makes sense. Because there's been some times where I've had some come up to me and like, you know what? There'd been days where, and this is when they told me this, I was surprised, but they're like, they'd wake up and they'd tell themselves, "Am I going to get bullied today?" Because a lot of people aren't aware, or they are aware that they are autistic, but since they don't really have the knowledge, they kind of get that little mindset. And so we really need to change that. And it's like we take 2 steps forward, but take many steps back. We're back to square one. And so be on the lookout for that. I might do a, we might, me and Daniel might go live on April 2nd for a special episode of NDNABA podcast, and probably even bring a couple surprise guests on.
Yeah,
I'm
keep an
very
eye out on your
excited.
Instagram, guys. That'll be really, really inspiring, I think, to go live with you, Martin. Even
Yeah,
though we're pretty off the cuff. What do you think, Brian? How are we doing so far?
I think it's fun. I think you got something good here. Keep doing it.
thank you, thank you.
Awesome. And again, thank you so much for being on the show. And for those of you guys who don't know, I'm Daniel. I'm founder of Da Vinci NCR Services LLC. This is Martin. His organization Inspire Autism. We can put both of the links in the description so you guys can see. Do check out Brian's channel at Bearded Behaviorist. Are there any other channels we should put down there for you, Brian?
I mean, I definitely recommend checking out a whole variety of voices. One voice that I definitely recommend checking out also is my friend Jude Afalake Alubidum's channel. He's trans, autistic, and black. And his channel is The Midnight Gospel, with 2 E's, so THEE Midnight Gospel. Highly recommend his work. It's like going to church without all the guilt. Highly recommend it. And I think that we do need to make sure that we're including voices that tend to be most frequently marginalized
Yes.
in what we're doing. And I think you briefly made allusion towards scrolling into trouble. So if you haven't had a chance, check out behavioral stories on YouTube and Instagram. Troy is actually putting out tomorrow. I keep on losing days, 24th of March. I mean, or you can release it today and it'll be tomorrow, whatever works. But
Yeah.
the biggest thing is just know that Behavioral Stories is doing a full expose, full
Okay.
4-part series where he's breaking down and analyzing the paper. Goes into some understanding of some ethics and how research the research community has behavioral contingencies that impact their behavior. Goes into how research can be twisted. He then goes into a portion where he talks about some questionnaires that he conducted for a few people, including myself. And then the last portion of the video is an interview with me. And I know some might think this tooting my own horn. I'm more interested in getting the truth out there. That's what I'm interested in. And so I highly recommend checking out Troy's work at Behavioral Stories. I believe the full video is for the expose is going to be on YouTube, but his Instagram Behavioral Stories has clips and links and all that good stuff. So highly recommend checking his work out, especially because he's put hours, more than 40 hours into creating, researching and creating this episode.
Oh yeah, and you know what? Shout out to Troy. We've been friends on LinkedIn for a while, and he always does a wonderful job just getting the word out about things like OBM, but also scrolling into trouble and the fallacies, the sort of violations of the ethics involved in publishing that article. He does a wonderful job with any research he does, and really, some really impressive stuff. I recommend adding him on LinkedIn as well, connecting with him. He's very helpful to any of you new RBTs in the field, for instance. He's constantly helping guys out, and women and people in this field who have just entered and maybe they're struggling. And he's a good guy. He'll talk to you. He's talked to me even, when I was less experienced in the field than I am now. So he's a very experienced guy, and definitely
solid human.
Shout out to Troy. Yeah. One more thing I want to bring up before we go. There is a fundraiser to get the direct NCR services development program off the ground. If you check it in the description, you can contribute to the direct NCR therapy services development program and help us reach our funding goal to create an inclusive ABA-based model with NCR, for instance, with Dr. Hanley's work, HRE occurring, and in the least restrictive environment, I might add. All these things go in line with this field of dreams. So if you want non-contingent reinforcement, natural environment teaching, you love Dr. Hanley, you love HRE, you love working in the school and promoting the LRE for your students, that's what we're all about. And that's the project we're developing. So check it out in the description below and help us make an inclusive and accepting environment for neurodivergent individuals. No matter the background, we want to tailor something positive for them that's beneficial, makes positive change, and create actual barriers that prevent anything other than that occurring. We don't want things to become a slippery slope in our field, and we are all aware those slippery slopes exist. So I think we're all finding unique ways to put in maybe some boundaries to help those who have maybe been pushed past their preferred preference of where they stand on their physical or their ethical boundaries. This is something for you. If you've left the field and you had a tough time, we hope you'll come back. We hope you'll see that we're trying to change and be a part of this model. I'd love to employ you guys. I'll say it right now. You tell me you want to come back and you like the NCR model, then I will personally, make it my mission to fulfill that goal of you seeing ABA bring benefit back into the kid's life the way you always knew you could have the potential to produce. Anything else before we go, Brian?
Human first, human always.
Human first, human always.
There we go.
All right. Should we end on that, Martin? What do you think?
Definitely. All right. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for another exciting episode coming next week where we have another guest coming on. And be prepared for some amazing content coming during Autism Acceptance Month. All right. Take care, guys.